Hello, good afternoon, or good morning, or maybe good evening, depending where you are in the world today. So, this is the July RELO Andes webinar, and my name is Duff Johnston. I'm an English Language Fellow working in Lima, Peru. And our topic today is learning about laughter, teaching humor in the English classroom. So, in just a few minutes, I want to find out where you all are coming from today. So, don't forget, our RELO Andes webinars are the third Thursday of each month. If you follow us on Facebook, you can find information about the topic and the time of every webinar. So, let's take some time. In comments, could you write a comment for us? Where are you attending the webinar from today? Is it in Latin America, Peru, someplace else in the region? Or is it from a completely different continent? Please tell us where you're coming from today. Don't be shy. Uh, I see people from all over, including here in Lima, where I am. Bulgaria. It's evening there. It's getting late at night. Yeah. More people from Peru. Pakistan. It's just past midnight. Good morning, Adnan. Yeah. Bolivia, our next door neighbors. Wonderful. Thanks for joining us. All right. Well, thank you. As usual, we have a really good crew of people. We have some people in Peru from the region, but also people across the seas. And we love it that you are our regular guests, our regular audience and community here at the RELO Andes webinar. So don't forget, if you want to discuss some of the ideas that you hear today, maybe talk more about humor, laughter in your own teaching, please attend the post-webinar discussion one day from today, Friday, July 21st at 2 p.m. Lima time. You can find the information about attending on Facebook, and I'll be there at 2 tomorrow, Lima time. Next month, we'll have another webinar on August 17th, the same time, 2 p.m. Lima time. You'll be finding information about the topic, the title, and the speaker very soon, early in August. Okay, so when I give a webinar, I like to start with some audience questions. I want to find out a little bit about you, and this will help me understand your context, your situation, and it might help me give a better webinar. So the question is, my first question, how important is laughter in your classroom? How important is laughter in your classroom? And why? So if laughter is important, why? If laughter is not important, why? Please write your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think and what you do in your classrooms. Yes, I believe it is the essence because it helps to lighten the mood. Thank you, Patricia. Super important. Yes. Somewhat important. Yeah. Important to break the ice. Yeah. It gives students express their inner emotions. Yes. Sometimes classrooms are very serious affairs, very serious places. There's a lot to do, not very much time. Sometimes there's a lot of stress, but laughter can help break the ice and it can help students express what they're feeling. Um, and Luis, it can help students feel more confident. And Fiorella, it's very important. I love the emotion in the very, because it catches the attention of the students and they feel more confident to participate. Yeah. Starts creating rapport. Carmen, yes. I actually find as a teacher, when I'm willing to laugh at myself, and because teachers make mistakes all the time, when I'm able to laugh at myself, that really helps my students relax because they're afraid of making mistakes. And if the teacher is able to laugh at themselves, students are willing to take risks. They start to relax more. They realize that they don't have to be perfect. All right. I have a second question for you. It's related, but a little bit different. How do you and your students use humor in your classes? So laughter, now we're asking about humor. How do you and your students use humor in your classes? Can you give us an example or two? And when I say humor, this could be planned humor or impromptu humor, humor in the moment without planning. Do you use humor? How? Ah, yes, Patricia, pun. We'll actually be talking a little bit about puns and wordplay today. With a language like English, puns and wordplay are really important. Ah, Diana, comic strips. Yes, to read and later they can discuss or have a post-speaking task. Comics are a great way to get really short, humorous stories or jokes to students. And with comics, the visuals can really give people an understanding of the speaker's attitudes and the situation. Yeah. Any other ideas? Yes. Kari, sometimes you have to play the fool to make students laugh. Sometimes a teacher needs to be a part-time clown. I think especially with younger learners, but I think all learners appreciate a teacher who's willing to look a little bit foolish to get a laugh and help people relax. Well, so we've had a few examples of how you use humor or your students use humor in the classroom. But it makes sense to me that not a lot of people responded to this second question because I actually think it's a little bit difficult. While we all agree, or most of us agree, that laughter is important in the classroom, even if it's only somewhat important, it's difficult to talk about humor because we don't often plan humor or think about humor um, in a conscious way when we're planning lessons. So that's one thing I want to talk about today. How can we more consciously include humor in our classes? How can that increase laughter? But also, how can that help language learning, language acquisition, language knowledge? So here's our agenda for today. It's going to be a short webinar. We'll talk by reviewing or talking about some of the potential benefits of humor in second language learning. And here I'm going to conflate, I'm going to put together laughter and humor into one thing. After that, we're going to talk about the difference between teaching with humor and teaching about humor. And it's this second thing, teaching about humor, that I want to focus on today, because I think it is difficult, maybe a new thing for a lot of us. And to give you some examples about teaching about humor, we're going to focus on humor and incongruity. And incongruity means a mismatch where expectations and reality do not match perfectly. A lot of humor, in I think most languages or many languages, is about incongruity, mismatch between words and intentions, words and reality. And to talk about humor and incongruity, we're going to talk about two types of incongruous humor with examples and a few learning activities or ideas you might try. Now, I can't cover all types of humor. There are so many different kinds, but we'll talk about two today, and hopefully that will get you thinking, maybe even trying some things in your own classroom. Yeah. All right. I love it. The humor, the jokes are continuing to come into comments. So let's talk about some of the potential benefits of humor and laughter in second language learning. And I think a lot of these you already covered in your comments. So humor can really reduce anxiety. And if you believe in the work of Stephen Krashen, humor can help lower the affective filter. That means the emotional, psychological resistance to input that a lot of students have in the classroom. So if you make them feel more at ease, they'll actually take in the language in the classroom or in the lesson. Also, there can be reduced anxiety with production. So again, with Krashen, if we talk about a monitor, part of the brain that's being so careful with mistakes that they don't say anything, a student doesn't say anything. If you reduce anxiety, people are more likely to produce language, to speak, to write, to not think about it so much. So with reduced anxiety, there's increased enjoyment and motivation too. We've talked about this. People talked in comments about icebreakers, humor, laughter as an icebreaker. And that all gets to the idea of community. When students can laugh together, they form a community. When teachers and students can laugh together, the community broadens and student-teacher rapport is built. Here's something else. When we talk about humor consciously, and we use humor from the target culture, the target language, we can also get valuable intercultural insights about the values, customs, in even everyday life of the target culture and target language. Of course, if we're using that same kind of humor, humor from the target language and the target culture, we're getting authentic examples of language use. This is humor, jokes made for native speakers or expert speakers, not for learners. And so it's authentic, real. And I think students might appreciate that and learn from it. If you get students using jokes themselves, retelling jokes, creating their own jokes, there's another opportunity for meaningful language use, production. And what I want to talk about today, if you're using the humor of incongruity, especially, you can get students thinking more critically. The humor of incongruity actually makes everyone think, even native speakers, because there's a mismatch between expectations, between language and reality, or language and intention. So there are other examples too, and I'm sure you could think of more with some time. Let's continue with our talk. So the inspiration for my talk today is coming from an article in the English Teaching Forum. And if you don't know about this free teaching journal, you can find it at americanenglish.state.gov. English Teaching Forum publishes articles from teachers just like you. A lot of them are bringing in their own classroom experience with tips and advice, maybe a little research or theory even. And so it's the authors Rusinski and Pritchard who talk about the difference between teaching with humor and teaching about humor. I'm going to use their ideas as a jumping off point today, but a lot of what follows are going to be my own ideas. So this is how the authors define teaching with humor: using any humorous techniques to improve the atmosphere of the class and make language learning more enjoyable and memorable. And I think most of us do this, even just a little bit in our classrooms. Sometimes it's making jokes in the moment, using humor in the moment. Other times it's slightly more planned. And this brings all the benefits of relaxation, community building, language learning. Here's what we're going to talk about today: teaching about humor. And this is helping learners improve their competency with humor in the target cultures. And the authors even call it L2 humor competence. There's so many different kinds of competences today that we're supposed to think about. And this is another one, L2 humor competence. Part of this is because humor varies between cultures and it varies between languages. Different languages have different opportunities for humor. And English has a lot of opportunities, as I'm sure you know. So, why should we teach about humor? We want our students to be able to know when humor is being used. As our students go outside the classroom, outside the textbook, to read more texts in English, to watch videos, to listen to music, they need to know when they're listening to something that is humorous for laughs and something that is more sincere, earnest. So this is really important for our students to learn, especially as they start reading real English language materials, not teaching materials. Also, we want students to be able to understand, to comprehend what the meaning is behind the humor. And this can be very difficult. If there's a lot of culture in the humor, it may be impossible to learn about unless you have a translator, a guide, who helps you understand the cultural situation. Now, for most of us, we don't have students who are going to be talking with native English speakers regularly or at any time. So responding to humor might not be so important outside of the classroom. But if your students want to travel to work outside in an English-speaking country, or if they want to interact regularly with native speakers, being able to respond to humor is a really important skill to have. Also in that same setting, production, being able to create your own humor is going to be really important. You can practice some of this in the classroom, but that might not be a real priority for you if your students are not going to use English that much with native English speakers in an English-speaking environment. Okay, so let's move on. I said I'm going to focus on one type of humor, and that's humor and incongruity. Again, incongruous means a mismatch. If something is incongruous, it's strange because it doesn't agree with what is usual or expected. And there are other kinds of humor, and some that we know, physical humor. A lot of you will know comedian Mr. Bean, Charlie Chaplin, the French comedian Jacques Tati. These are comedians who use almost no words, but they're incredibly funny because they use their body and the environment to create laughs. So there are many kinds of humor. We're going to talk about incongruous humor. So incongruous humor is unexpected, and it's often a little confusing at first. If you've studied linguistics, you might know about garden path sentences. These are sentences with the word choice and the grammar. You think there's one meaning, but when you come to the end of the sentence, you realize a trick has been played on you. Your expectations have been challenged. And this happens even with native speakers. Even native speakers enjoy this incongruity because it's unexpected, surprising. And if we have incongruous humor that is written or spoken, it really requires you to think on the language being used, maybe the grammar, maybe the word choice, um, maybe the intention. Because incongruous humor makes us think about the language, turns us back inwards to think about what we're reading or hearing. It's a wonderful tool for language teaching and learning. And if we get our students using incongruous humor, they will feel more like masters of English themselves. Not only can they use literal, sincere English, they can play with the language to have fun and actually challenge people, including their teacher. Okay, so we're going to talk about two types of incongruous humor today. And there are many, but for time's sake, we're going to focus on something I call wordplay plus and verbal irony, including sarcasm. Now, a lot of you know the term wordplay. We associate it with puns, homonyms, homophones. But I'm saying wordplay plus because I want to extend that beyond the word to also bring in phrases like idioms or even clauses like sayings. I also want to include connected speech. One of the most difficult things for us to teach and for our students to learn is how English sounds when it's spoken naturally, normally, quickly. Connected speech often sounds nothing like written English looks. And a lot of wordplay in English plays with the difference between written words and connected speech. Okay, and then verbal irony and sarcasm. So verbal irony is when words are used that mean the opposite of what you really think, especially in order to be funny. Now, if irony is being used to add bitterness, criticism, or insult, we call that sarcasm. And for those of you who know English humor from England, Britain, sarcasm, irony are really important to a lot of traditional forms of humor there. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Okay, so let's talk about wordplay, homonyms. And this is something your students learn pretty quickly as soon as they start expanding the vocabulary. There are a lot of words that are spelled and pronounced the same way in English that have very different meanings. And for students, this can be very confusing, but it can also be a source of humor. And I encourage you to think about how you can use homonyms in your own teaching. So let's take a look. Why did the old man fall in the well? Because he couldn't see that well. Yes. Now, this one is especially tricky. Our first well in the question is the noun. It's a physical well where we get water, or maybe an oil well where you get oil. What is the second well in the answer doing? I would argue that it's an adverb. It's describing the verb see. You might say informally good. He couldn't see that good. We mean well. So the tricky thing about the answer is that well could refer to a noun or the adverb. So there's this ambiguity that's really strange. And the more you think about it, it's kind of pleasing because you actually have to think about the language being used and not the meaning behind them. Let's take a look at another joke with homonyms. Time flies like an arrow. Yes, time flies very fast. It flies in one direction, and I don't know, you can't bring it back. You can't get it back. Time flies like an arrow, but fruit flies like a banana. What's happening here? Time flies like an arrow. So here flies is the verb to fly like a bird, a plane. And like is a preposition. It's introducing a simile, a comparison. So time is like an arrow. It is similar to an arrow. But when we look at flies and like in the second sentence or the second clause, what are we talking about? Here, flies is not a verb, it's a noun, and like is a verb, not a preposition. So fruit flies like or love a banana. Yes, exactly, fly the insect. English is full of all these ambiguities. Sometimes we turn verbs like fly into nouns like fly. So there's going to be a lot of confusion sometimes. It takes a while. Yes, I'm reading some comments. It takes a while. So, of course, this joke might not be very good with beginning English students, but maybe intermediate, advanced can appreciate it. Whatever you do, whenever you use this gives us an occasion to talk about how English works and the confusion that we often have with homonyms. Okay, let's talk about homophones. These are words that are spelled differently and that have different meanings, but are pronounced the same way. So we all know, I'm seeing some examples, hair, here. Let's take a look at a joke. And this is coming from a comic strip. It's a little bit challenging, but let's see if you can get what's being done here with the joke. I'll read it to you in a minute. All right. So I'll read the comic strip. Pick a number between 1 and 10. Why? Okay, we'll play it your way. Pick a stupid letter from A to Z. All right. This is a little bit more challenging than the other two jokes we looked at. But here, the homophone is between the question word why and the letter Y, which is also a word. So the first speaker is misinterpreting the question as an answer. This is a little bit more sophisticated, but homophones can work like this as well. And this is another example of why, or this is a good example of how comic strips are a good place to find jokes like this. Many comic strips recycle jokes that are told orally and put them down on the page for students to look at and think about more clearly. All right, this one's a little bit abstract, but I think you might get it too. Again, this deals with spelling. In the last slide, we saw the letter Y. Let's take a look at this joke. What do you call a bear without an ear? And if you know the answer to this joke, please write it in the comments. I'd be very happy if somebody knows or can guess. Yes, the answer is a bee. So here you are moving away. Thank you, Patricia. This is a classic joke that a lot of students like to tell. A letter B, or here, because we're playing with the letter B and the animal, the insect bee, there's a play on the animal theme. And again, incongruous humor forces us and forces students back on the language. We have to examine the meaning and the words, maybe even the spelling being used. So in this joke, the word bear is removing the word ear. So ear is part of the word bear. When you remove ear, all you have is the letter B, which sounds like the insect, the animal bee. So these are the kind of jokes that children in the United States and other English-speaking countries really start to enjoy when they get to be about the age 9, 10, 11, because they're starting to really feel they understand the language and they can play with it themselves and even fool adults, fool their parents. Okay, let's expand it. So let's go beyond wordplay to wordplay plus. Now let's work first of all with a saying. Curiosity killed the cat. What does this mean? I think many of you have heard this before. This is a saying. Curiosity killed the cat. Can anybody explain it to us in the comments? And actually, this is a common saying in English. What does this mean? Yes, Diana, curiosity can be dangerous. So in this saying, we all know that, or most of us know, cats are very curious creatures. They go places they shouldn't. They play with things that might be dangerous. And yes, could be gossip as well. So in other words, this is something that we say to people who are getting nosy or going places they shouldn't go, doing things that they've been forbidden to do because they're interested or curious. So this is a very common saying. It's just said like that. You know, curiosity killed the cat. It's a warning. So this is a well-known saying in English. Here is how a famous American comedian built on this saying. Curiosity killed the cat, but for a while, I was a suspect. So for English speakers who know the term or the saying, curiosity killed the cat, the idea that this is a real situation and not a metaphor, not just an image we create to warn people, is unexpected and it's very confusing at first. But when we think about it, a killing, a murder, and then a suspect, a criminal who might be the guilty one, it's a hilarious joke. So taking sayings, idioms that are well known and getting us to think about the literal meaning of the words is a real source of humor in English. All right, let's take a look at idioms. Here's an example. What did one elevator, some people will say a lift, say to the other? And this is also a classic joke. If you know the answer, you can write it in the comments. I'll give you a couple seconds. What did one elevator say to the other one? All right. In the interest of time, I'll show you the answer. I think I'm coming down with something. So here we're playing on the idiom to come down with something, which means to become sick. But of course, elevators can also come down with something or someone. So for those of you who teach English, who teach intermediate or advanced English, we all know that idioms are really hard to learn and to teach because the literal meaning often is quite different than the intended meaning. And here we're playing with the literal and the idiomatic meaning of to come down with something. So there are lots of jokes based upon idioms as well. All right, let's move on. Connected speech, and this is really difficult. As I said earlier, it's really difficult to teach students how to understand normally spoken connected English, and it's really hard to get them to speak English that way as well. And because there's a difficulty between the written form and the connected spoken form, there's lots of room for play, for fun, and for misunderstanding. So I'm going to share what I think are children's favorite jokes in the US. Maybe not anymore, but they used to be. And that is the knock knock joke. These are very popular with children who are about 7, 8, maybe younger. And they're some of the first jokes that American children start to tell each other and to tell their parents. And after just a few days, the parents are tired of them because knock knock jokes never end. There are so many of them. How many of you know knock knock jokes? Have you ever read some, heard some? Have you ever used them yourself? Write a comment if you have. Yeah. Have you used knock knock jokes? Yeah. The great thing about knock knock jokes, like many jokes, is there are collections. When I was a kid, there used to be physical books of jokes, knock knock jokes, but now they're all on the internet. And at the end, I'll share a couple links with you, but you can easily type in knock knock jokes on the internet and you'll find a lot that will be good to use in your classes. So a knock knock joke always has two speakers and it has 5 turns speaking. Now, knock knock jokes are not real conversations. Most of the words are already pre established. So it's always knock knock, someone's knocking at the door. The answer is who's there? Then there's an answer. Usually it's just one word. And the follow up is answer who. So I might say Duff. And the answer would be Duff who? What's your family name? I don't know who you are. And then the final turn is the answer plus something very funny and unexpected. This is where the incongruity comes in. So let me give you one example, maybe not the best, but I think you'll understand. Knock, knock. Who's there? Olive. Olive who? Olive you very much. Now please let me in. So here the word olive sounds like I love when you say it very quickly at even normal speed in a spoken sentence. Olive you very much. I love you very much. This is how knock knock jokes work. They usually take one word that can be confused with another word or that sounds like 2 or more words in English put together in normal spoken conversation. So I have a few more examples for you, great productive words you can use with students to help them create their own knock-knock jokes. And again, you will find hundreds of knock-knock jokes on the internet. Most of them are good for children or even young learners. All right, connected speech. Let's move to something different. And this is a little bit more difficult. Verbal irony, sarcasm. This is when the words that are said do not match the meaning or the intention behind the words. So a lot of you know Peanuts by Charles Schulz with Snoopy the dog. Here Snoopy is talking with Sally, Charlie Brown's younger sister. And Charlie Brown and Sally are the owners of Snoopy. You're not waiting for your supper, are you? No, I always sit around like this with a dish in my mouth. So here, Snoopy, the dog, is using irony. He's saying, I always stand here. I always keep my food dish in my mouth. And of course, this is not what he really means. He doesn't do that. He's making an ironic or maybe a sarcastic comment. Now, sarcasm, again, when it's sarcasm, it's to insult, to express dissatisfaction, or to criticize. Irony, sarcasm can be really difficult for everybody to understand, and it's especially difficult for learners who are trying to figure out the literal meaning of words. So how do we know if there's sarcasm being used, if it's to insult or to express criticism? In this comic, it becomes very clear. And this is the same strip. And I hope you're not thinking some biting sarcasm. How about no sarcasm, but lots of biting? So here, biting sarcasm. Biting means hurtful, strong, powerful, painful sarcasm. And Snoopy is turning that metaphoric use of biting into the literal use of a dog or someone biting someone else. So how about no sarcasm, but lots of biting? So it's clear here, Snoopy is being sarcastic. Now, even though Snoopy is trying to hurt Lucy for not feeding him, it's a joke for us. So the overall intent is humor, even if for Lucy, it might not be so funny. And very quickly, verbal irony, sarcasm is very important in traditional English or British humor. In fact, when you talk to a lot of people from Britain, they will complain that Americans don't understand irony. And it's true, a lot of American English use is quite sincere compared to the humor you see in Great Britain. So one of my favorite examples is the character of Professor Snape, Severus Snape, from the Harry Potter books and movies, because he is the master of sarcasm. And I'll just quickly share one example. This is from the book, The Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. And Snape asks Harry for an answer. What's the difference between an inferius, a kind of creature, and a ghost? And Harry's initial answer is, well, ghosts are transparent. You can see through them. Now, this is obvious, right? At least in most cultures, ghosts do not have physical form. You can see through them. And Snape's answer, oh, very good, interrupted Snape, his lip curling. And so Snape's lip is curling. He's sneering. He's clearly not happy with Potter. He's clearly insulting Potter. Yes, it's easy to see that nearly 6 years of magical education have not been wasted on you, Potter. Ghosts are transparent. So here's the idea. You don't need 6 years of magical education or any education to have the idea that ghosts are transparent. So this is an example of sarcasm, irony coming from Snape. And I really love Alan Rickman, the actor's portrayal of Snape, because he put so much into his voice and his face. He's the master of irony in this series. Very mean. All right, very briefly, how can we use humor in the classroom? We can learn jokes and study the language within them, spelling, pronunciation, the parts of speech, the meaning. We've done some of that today. You can also ask students to spend more time with the jokes. They can show the meanings in posters or comics. This is something we did here today as well. Calvin and Hobbes, yes. One of my favorite, Edison, one of my favorite comic strips, Calvin and Hobbes, has a lot of sarcasm in it, American sarcasm. Another great idea is to give pairs of students jokes. Have them learn it together, have them tell it together, and then have the class spread out. Every pair of students can tell jokes to each other. And then you can ask students what were the best jokes they learned. So it's not just about hearing and understanding joke, it's about owning the jokes. And this is the secret. When children, young learners, beginning learners, feel that they own the jokes themselves, they gain confidence, a sense of achievement. You can also get students to share the jokes with outsiders, maybe their family if they speak English, visitors, other classes. And you can get students to create their own jokes, in particular, knock-knock jokes. You can have them choose productive words and names. And here are a few words and names in English that sound very much like connected phrases or other words. So water, water. What are you doing? Ben, been waiting too long. Let me in. Annie, Annie, Harry, hurry. Anita, I need a. Police, please. Weekend, weekend. Go, go to go. Yes. So there are hundreds of knock-knock jokes. You can take the answer words out of those jokes if you think the students can create their own knock-knock jokes with them. Okay, teaching with irony and sarcasm is more difficult. We're going to wrap up in just a minute. In most classrooms, they're not going to actually be using irony and sarcasm with native English speakers. And I would actually argue it might be dangerous to teach people to be sarcastic in English because they might be mean to each other. They might be mean to you, just having fun. So What I would argue is if you can at least get students to think about irony and sarcasm, help them identify when they are being used. So Ruchinsky and Pritchard said, contrast sincere sentences with sarcastic sentences. Get them to pay attention to non-vocal cues like facial expressions, eye rolls, and paralinguistic cues like tone of voice, elongated syllables. These are often cues that irony or sarcasm are being used. Also, you want students to understand why irony is being used. Is it a joke? Is it to insult somebody? Is it to create rapport with someone else? You can also get them to practice responding and producing, but you have to ask yourself if it's necessary or wise in your class. All right, let's wrap up. So we talked about potential benefits of humor in second language learning. We talked about the difference between teaching with and teaching about humor. And I urged you to think about consciously teaching about humor. You can learn a lot about English, and students can learn a target culture and gain a mastery of the language that might be new for them. And of course, we talked about two kinds of incongruous humor, wordplay plus and verbal irony or sarcasm. I hope some ideas here sounded interesting to you. Maybe you laughed at one joke, or at least laughed inside. And maybe this will encourage you to think about ways you can use humor, English language humor, in your own classes consciously. So don't forget, if you want to talk more, maybe share some knock-knock jokes or other jokes tomorrow. I'll come with some jokes. Please come tomorrow, 2 p.m., and join the post-webinar discussion. I'll be there, and I hope some of you can join as well. Maybe you can learn from some jokes and tell me them tomorrow as well. So next month, Thursday, August 17th, 2 p.m., our next webinar. And here are some resources, some good websites, and they're very easy to find these jokes online. Knock-knock jokes, other jokes. So have a great week. I hope to see some of you tomorrow, and thank you for coming today.